evil robots names of angels from in the Bible, including a scene of a 14-year-old masturbating over an unconscious girl, and having vague endings is not classic to me. The Human Instrumentality Project is a bunch of artsy-fartsy bullshit that makes no sense to anyone not fond of thinking in the extreme abstract. Anno urges us to find our own answers because he himself has no answers for the very thing that he created. Viewers, on the other hand, see NGE, don't understand half of it, and thus equate this misunderstanding and vagueness to some great work of art. I appreciate the fact that the characters were complex, but who really cares? Is this a soap opera? Is it really a selling point to say that they've taken an extraordinary amount of screen time delving deep into the psyche of animated characters?
What the fuck? Neon Genesis Evangelion is the definition of a classic anime. It changed the face of the genre as we know it, was influential in ways that very few pieces of media could ever claim to be, and introduced a whole generation to the idea of animation that was meant to be something a bit more meaningful. But you already knew that, didn't you? At this stage, there's been almost as much written about the series' legacy as has been written about the actual series itself. It feels like even casual analysis of the show has reached an almost academic level, not necessarily in terms of how galaxy-brained it is, but more so in that way where damn near every possible surface-level observation has already been so thoroughly examined that finding a fresh hot take is next to impossible. However, despite this exhaustive examination, re-examination, and re-re-examination, one take has remained consistent and unending since the series' conclusion over 20 years ago. Last 2 episodes. Kinda fucky, right? The legacy of episodes 25 and 26 of Evangelion are, let's call it spicy. And just like spicy food, it may be your favorite thing ever if you've got the taste for it. Or it may compel you to try and murder the cruel son of a bitch who had the audacity to give it to you, even if they sincerely were just trying to give you something they thought you'd enjoy. You don't get 2 endings to a show with 2 completely different meanings because everyone was just so pleased with the first ending that they just had to have seconds. Gainax got absolutely flooded by the backlash to these episodes, which sounds like a pretty standard reaction for anime fans if you've ever been on Twitter, but you gotta remember that this was pre-mainstream internet, baby. Back in the days when you had to pay cash money to the Japanese government to buy a stamp before you could send off your death threat. Just kidding. They also got death threats sent to their email. There was also one spray painted outside the side of their office. If you need a source for all of this, may I recommend watching End of Evangelion because it is all literally part of that movie. This went way deeper than just some pissed off fans. A lot of people felt legitimately betrayed by this ending. Even as the years have ticked on, it's still not rare to find people talking about how, oh yeah, Neon Genesis Evangelion is great, but you should probably just skip the last 2 episodes and watch the movie instead. To many, it feels like the series was rushed to completion while leaving behind the bombastic action and intriguing conspiracies that seemed to define the series up to that point. Additionally, if you were, or are, one of the people who saw Eva as being pretentious pseudo-intellectual drivel, then oh boy did these episodes seem to validate the ever-living hell out of that viewpoint. I mean, we were here just a few episodes ago doing some of the coolest giant robot fights ever put in an anime while the conspiracy subplot becomes more and more elaborate. Then we watch 2 boys become very, very good friends, and then suddenly, BAM! We're doing this abstract no exit by way of Battleship Yamato bullshit. It's not like anything could have foreshadowed this. Why couldn't they just make a cool ending with more big robot fights and we find out what happened to everyone and it finally reveals the full conspiracy? Wouldn't that be fun? On that note, I want to make it clear up front that I am not here to shit on End of Evangelion. Not even a little. I actually think it's an old-time classic, a true masterclass in both animation and the art of telling your audience that you personally despise them. It's got its flaws to be sure, but, you know, what doesn't? It is an absolutely stellar film that I love dearly, which everyone should see, and is more than deserving to be kept in discussion with the original series. In fact, I'll even go further and say that if you prefer End of Eva as a, well, ending, then I can't really say I blame you. As we'll touch on a bit later, there is a lot to love and respect there, as well as several things it just out and out does better, mainly because they have completely different goals. I'm not necessarily here to convince you that one is better than the other. Rather, this video is here purely to make the case for why I and others find episodes 25 and 26 to be a near perfect ending to the series, despite whatever shortcomings they may have. With that said, let's see which ending does a better job of paying off what built up to it. The deeply layered, lovingly crafted, existentialist art piece the series was designed to culminate in, or the classic movie that was assembled because people wouldn't stop sending Anno itemized lists of the fascinating new ways he should try using cheese wire and chairs. However, Eva, being the dense religious text that it is, requires a bit of an explanation of a few key elements, as well as an explanation of some of its core themes, to make sure we're all on the same page here. After all, an ending can only be as good as the build up to it, right? Also worth noting is that as a result of Eva being what it is, we're going to be talking about some really dark shit here. Like suicide, abuse of basically all kinds, more than little gore and violence, and questioning why we're even here kind of dark. I can promise this will end on a happy note, but just like the series itself, there's going to be a whole lot of sad to work through before we get there, and if you're not feeling up to that right now, then I wouldn't really blame you if you wanted to get off here. Also, spoilers for both the series and End of Eva. 'Cause duh. Nothing for the rebuilds, though. Most importantly, though, I promise I will try my best not to sound like an unhinged pseudo-intellectual fanboy whose life has been intimately molded by these 2 episodes and has since spent an entire lifetime thinking about what they mean and applying those lessons to their life. Because of course I haven't done that. That's what a weirdo would do.
They're looking at me with their glassy eyes, they're gonna bury me. Dripping with Hennessy and ecstasy, they're gonna bury me. I guess I probably should have done my research. All the people I love the best are starting to get frustrated with me being a mess. The people I got no hate are always impressed. All the people I love the best have grown increasingly impatient with the person I am, and some people I hardly know will never understand. Hope you love me too.
And that is as happy as this video is getting. Okay, so, in order to understand why the ending works, we first need to make sure we're all on the same page about a few key things that episodes 1 through 24 do to set the stage going into 25 and 26. Namely, what has, roughly speaking, happened so far in the story that this is supposed to be concluding? How has Neon Genesis Evangelion told its story so far? What is the Human Instrumentality Project and what was it designed to do? And finally, what has Eva, thematically, been talking about up to this point? Let's take them one by one, shall we? For that first point, you've hopefully seen the series already, so let's try to keep this as succinct as humanly possible. Like 14 years ago, some people found God just chilling out in Antarctica. They then poked him with a stick or something, which causes the opening of Akira. Present day, this sad boy is recruited by Bad Dad and the world's youngest MILF to pilot in order to kill some Bayonetta bosses. Quick itemized list of everyone's emotional baggage. Shinji, abandonment issues that keep him from forming connections which prevent him from believing he has value as a person because he's permanently isolated. Rei, literal imposter syndrome. Misato, prone to self-destruction because she doesn't think she deserves happiness. Kaiji, too handsome. Asuka, entire motivation for living is tied to being a pilot, lies constantly about her feelings in order to keep her distance from others, and her mother's suicide has instilled in her a perpetual need to be noticed by all around her that manifests as a massive superiority complex that makes her completely unable to ever get the validation she so desperately needs because she doesn't consider anyone worthy enough to give it to her except for the older man who flat out rejects her and was always going to because she is a literal child, Gendo Ikari. Asshole. Everything's fun for a while, except not really because everyone still low-key hates themselves. There's a dancing episode that inexplicably may be the best episode of the first half of the series. Then we hit episode 16, and there's a subtle tone shift you may pick up somewhere amongst all the art house screaming and blood. We find out that the is somehow even more terrifying than originally thought. Yeah, I don't like that. Then each character takes a turn being the main character for an episode, and that goes exactly how you'd expect in this newly minted hell carnival of fuck. Romantic horror, psych horror, body horror. Misato loses her only real friend and lover. Asuka gets absolutely fucked up. I'm not even going to joke about this one. This is just legit kinda dark. And Rei 2 dies before being replaced shortly thereafter by Rei 3. All of this then caps off with Prince Idiot becoming best friends with the new boy in the same way that Oscar Wilde was friends with Alfred Douglas, before concluding with a shot that's held on just about as long as the elevator scene but that no one ever seems to complain about, before hugging him a bit too hard, and now we're at the point in the narrative where it's about time to tell Shinji about the rabbits. Now, all of that is well and good, but for reasons that will become clear, it's important that we take a moment and look not just at what was said, but how it was said. I mean, I just ran through the plot in more or less the worst way I could think of, and I think it's safe to say that it is significantly better than the original series, so clearly how you tell a story makes a serious difference. Eva does this most famously with... yeah, those. And those giant robots are amazing. They're foundational to the series. Eva Unit 1 is so iconic that you can spot it by color palette alone. Hell, the series is named after them. They're fantastic. However, the giant robots are only one small part of what this series uses to get across its ideas. There is also, of course, the interpersonal drama between the pilots and the adults, as well as the dense conspiracy plotline around Sele. However, as we go on, we see Eva more than willing to engage in more slow-paced, and occasionally even experimental methods of getting its message across. As early as episode 3, we can see the show dipping into lengthy, near-silent atmospheric shots that are way more about visual storytelling and tone than anything else. These are a staple of Hideaki Anno style, and one of the things that sets Eva apart both in terms of its tone and presentation to this day. You ever see Koyana Nisquati? Yeah, me neither. Then we hit episode 16, and things go absolutely donkey brain bananas when Shinji accidentally drops his portable hole on the ground like the graceless level 2 group project deadweight he is. This results in one of the most creative and abstract sections of the show, and for me, this is kind of where the real Evangelion begins. The moment Shinji gets pulled underground, the series permanently shifts from being primarily concerned with the daily interactions between our main characters, and begins to instead focus on their inner lives. Who they are, what they struggle with, what they fear. We've shown you these characters on a good day, now we're going to break them. And it couldn't really be kickstarted in a more effective way. This artsy self-examination from Shinji, by Shinji, really allows us to quite literally get inside his head and see just how deep his insecurities run. Don't get me wrong, Shinji would still be a pretty rich character without these kinds of scenes, but it's this style of storytelling that makes Gregor Samsa Jr. over here worth writing decades of analysis over. Not to be outdone, Rei and Asuka also get scenes like this as well. Congratulations, guys! The advantage this kind of delivery has is directness. Adding layers of creative abstraction to this stuff can certainly make for stellar art, but sometimes just sitting down and speaking plainly can do wonders for communicating your message to your audience. Especially if your target audience is, say, disaffected 14-year-old nerds who see their insecurities and fears reflected in the characters and may or may not have the media literacy needed to be able to fully grasp the meaning of what the series is saying about them otherwise. And if you think that's me dunking on 14-year-olds, no, that's me dunking on myself. Some may say that this lacks subtlety, but I'd argue that when you're talking about emotions as complicated and difficult as the ones being handled in these sections, you kind of have to be as blunt as possible. These are challenging subjects to discuss, even when spoken about clearly. Hence why so many people seem not to get it, despite it speaking in pretty direct terms a lot of the time. It's just hard to talk about, but it's important to talk about. And if you don't like these sections, then, well, fair enough. But the point is that surreal, monologue-driven storytelling was nothing new to the series by the time we reached the finale, and would continue to be a thing afterwards in End of Evangelion and beyond. These kinds of scenes have always been just as vital to how Evangelion works as any kind of robot. Anyways, speaking of complicated and hard to talk about, just what the hell is the Human Instrumentality Project? After all, that's what's taking place during 25 and 26, so understanding what this is pretty essential to getting what's going on, since doing so will make the events far more grounded and coherent than they may first seem. So, to put it as plainly as I possibly can, the Human Instrumentality Project is, roughly speaking, a plan to put an end to human suffering and loneliness by bringing every human soul in existence together, where they will then fill in for the flaws and insecurities of one another with their own personal strengths, while their own flaws are accommodated for by others, in order to create one singular, unified, content entity. You catch all that? Basically, it's a way to force every human being in the world to be emotionally connected and supportive of one another by causing all barriers between everyone's souls, in canon known as an AT field, to disappear. Kind of like a big jigsaw puzzle made out of human emotions and Thai tea. This is why when we actually see this process play out in End of Eva, we generally see everyone being turned to goo by an illusion of someone they love, or at least want love from. AT fields are kept up entirely by ego. Something that tends to get lost pretty quickly around people we're intimate with. The one exception to this is the one guy who, in canon, is a confirmed true blue nihilist. So to hell with it, just brute force it with a ton of rays. You thought you could game the system with your life is meaningless bullshit, but there is no escaping the literal cuddle puddle. Point is though, for our purposes, all you really need to know is that these last 2 episodes take place during instrumentality. And that means we are quite literally seeing each of these characters' souls interact in a space where they are all forced to be completely open and honest with each other. I realize this is all kind of dense and weird, but it is all in service of what Ava's here to say. And just what is that exactly? That's kind of a hefty question because it's about a lot of things. This is a complex story with a lot of possible messages to be gleaned from it. It's about growing into adulthood and the living nightmare it is to live as someone who's not yet an adult, but no longer a child. It's also about how every human seems to be desperately trying to reach out for someone else, and why we all too often fail to ever truly grasp each other. It's about how someone can potentially learn to survive parental abuse, and the subtle ways it can creep back into our lives. It's also about all kinds of weird Freudian mom shit. Most famously though, it's about hating yourself, while trying to find value in who you are. And don't get me wrong, the series is about that. However, hating yourself doesn't happen in a vacuum. Self-loathing is a response to your own actions. Actions motivated by an initial cause. And Ava knows this. So, what is the meaning behind the self-hatred of the characters of Ava? Well, what that meaning is exactly could be worded a million different ways, but for our purposes, this is my own general reading of Evangelion's meaning. And also where shit starts to get really heavy. You are free to disagree with me, as I'm sure many of you will, because this is Ava and no one can agree on anything, but I think I could easily support this thesis with plenty of evidence from the show, and we need a frame of reference to get anywhere, so with that in mind, why do you deserve to exist in this world? Now hold on, I want to be clear that I didn't ask what justifies the existence of humans. I'm asking, why do you, as an individual, deserve the right to exist? You see, I'm phrasing it like that because I'm sure that for most of you, of course, people deserve the right to exist. But as we'll see, many of us are often far readier to forgive other people for things we may take years to forgive ourselves for. Things like, for example, existing. Why do you deserve to exist? At the heart of everything in Neon Genesis Evangelion, underneath all its bombast and obscure lore, is this question and everything that follows from it. Is the answer to that question something intrinsic, or is it something we have to earn? What is it that makes your own personal life valuable? Is it actions? If so, do we let who we essentially are as individuals determine what actions we take, or should we aim to consistently choose to take specific actions that will then reveal our true character? And why so often do we seem very ready to accept other people's value while being so eager to downplay our own? Most of all though, how the hell did we hit this level of miserable pretension so fast? As a direct result of these questions, it starts to become clear that Neon Genesis Evangelion is, in a lot of ways, about how we try to find our reason for being in how others perceive and treat us. Which quickly leads to discussions about the lies we tell about who we are in order to get others to like us, the way those lies come back to haunt and harm us, and, most importantly, why we tell ourselves those lies in the first place. This theme can be seen in basically any of our main players, but especially in the Trash Prince himself, Shinji Ikari. At the beginning of the series, Shinji is someone who always does what he's told in a clear attempt to not be a problem. This isn't to say he's someone without good intent or compassion, but at the end of the day, his actions are determined first and foremost by what the people around him expect of him. It's also why he's constantly apologizing. He sees himself as having no value to the people around him, and hence, sees himself as a burden that he must apologize to others for bearing. His top priority by default is to not inconvenience others, because he assumes that's all he can give to the people around him, which, ironically, kind of makes him a massive chore to deal with. He claims he lives like this just because it's the easiest way to get people to like him, and there is some truth to this to be sure, but it gets really slippery as we go on. We see this as he begins to seemingly decide for himself who he wants to be, specifically in this case, his decision to commit to piloting Ava Unit 1. On the surface, this seems like growth, but when pressed on why he pilots the Ava, he more or less answers the same as before. He does so because it's easier, because he wants people to like him. However, this ultimately reveals that his belief that he's worthless is really more of a symptom than it is his true problem, as Shinji still continues to see himself as a vile person undeserving of love and begins to push others away yet again, despite having a valuable role in their lives. The only difference is that his old method immediately pushed others away, while this one manages to get him some of the validation he so desperately requires. However, he's still letting how other people perceive him be the ultimate deciding factor in how he lives his life. He still views himself, on an essential level, as being a tool for other people to use for their own ends with no regard for his own desires, and this is tragic because he does genuinely despise having to be an Eva pilot. It is something that, objectively, hurts him. Physically and mentally, damn near every time he does it. This continues all the way up through episode 24. Even killing Kaoru is something that he was told to do by basically everyone, Kaoru included. It was not something he chose to do. However, if there's ever been an action that demanded that someone make it of their own self-determining volition, then taking the life of another sentient creature is basically it. And that's more or less why he finally snaps as we enter episode 25. It's not just that he killed the only person to show him sincere affection, it's that he didn't really choose to do it himself. He didn't really do it with a proper understanding of why it needed to be done. If that were the case, then he wouldn't repeatedly insist that Kaoru was a good person, because he's not. He was going to kill literally everyone. He just went along with it because that's what the people who determine his worth decided he should do. And it's these kinds of failings, these decisions made out of a compulsion to fulfill a role laid out by others in order to acquire their validation, instead of choosing their own path based on their own desires, that nearly the entire major cast falls into. Asuka sees herself as essentially being the best Eva pilot. Rei sees herself as essentially being a replaceable doll, both because they're living in the hopes of impressing others above all else. Hell, even Gendo's actions come down to him seeing himself as being, above all else, Yui's husband, going as far as to give up his own name, son, and the entire goddamn world to pursue that goal. It's not living for other people that's the problem, but letting other people be all you are. And every character has fallen prey to it at some point. It's both of these factors, the setup of what the Human Instrumentality Project is, and the themes the series has been building up to and playing with throughout its entire run, that set the stage for episodes 25 and 26. Without it, we wouldn't have the proper narrative justification to get into the heads of these characters to really get at the root of who they are and what that says. However, before we dive into what it is these episodes are here to say, I think it may be worthwhile to talk about something debatably even more important: how it says it. It would be pretty disingenuous of me to go through this entire thing as though what it was trying to communicate was what people took issue with. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't think that helped its case, since what it's trying to say is kind of dense and complex in a way that can make it seem very hard to approach. But I think it's clear that a big part of this issue lies in how this thing was said, rather than what it said. And you know, I can appreciate that. These last two episodes are super jarring when lined up against the rest of the series, and dropped a lot of things that, to a large number of viewers, must have seemed like the entire point of the show. Stuff like the angels, Seele, what the hell Adam is, and so on felt like really big, weighty questions at the time. Likewise, even the payoff we do get is dense and abstract, being largely delivered in complex, existentialist monologues. And, I freely admit, it can be a bit much. Especially since all those sick kaiju fights have been replaced with a Spartan slideshow of reused footage, and a large amount of what we'll charitably call minimalist animation. As such, I will say up top that if you didn't like these episodes on a stylistic level because you found them to be a bit too dry, well, that's fair enough. We've all got our own taste, and that is more than a valid critique. Additionally, I will freely acknowledge that many of these choices, including some of my favorites, were made with severe restrictions of the available budget and time in mind. Checking out literally any interview about the production of these episodes will reveal that they undeniably had troubled creations. There is no question about that. It was a shit show. However, if I may be so bold, may I suggest that that doesn't automatically make them bad. In fact, I'd like to suggest that these episodes are not only a natural continuation of the style that the series has been moving towards up to this point, but also has far more thought put into its aesthetic elements than one might think. For instance, let's take what may be the most infamous example across either episode. Those goddamn frames drawn with marker. If there's anything in this episode that just truly screams,
Oh god, we have 8 hours to finish this and our budget is some string cheese I found in the fridge.
it's these shots. And yeah, that was more or less the reality. But as someone who just made a video about how artworks can unintentionally be enhanced as a direct result of a thing being rushed, I'm not so eager to say that inherently makes it bad. Especially since it seems pretty clear to me that these scenes, in whatever form they were ever going to take, were always going to be just a little weird. After all, while this may be among the most surreal and abstract scenes in the entire series, it's also one of the most vital for Shinji. For the first time, Shinji steps outside of his own perspective and realizes that he has no true self, but rather, due to the fact that he requires others to determine who he should be, there is no definitive Shinji, but rather a series of images, symbols, and ideas that make up Shinji in the minds of others, that are then reflected back onto him and shape who he thinks he's supposed to be. But that Shinji isn't really the true Shinji because he's merely parroting back to people what he thinks they want him to be. Yes, I know, I continue to fail at the mission statement of this video. Yes, this will be on the test, and indeed, I can see my own large intestine from here. Please, bear with me. The point is that all of the scenes that use this kind of stylization are doing so for the purposes of conveying the ongoing effects of instrumentality and reflecting that Shinji is ill-defined as a person. That's why it presents him in multiple art styles. It's trying to showcase that as long as Shinji looks to others to figure out who he is, he will remain ill-defined, his whole being determined by something that is fleeting and potentially not true to who he is. Now, is this the best way they could have gone about showing this? Well, nothing's perfect, so probably not. Is it transparently kinda made on the cheap? Most certainly. But is it still an effective way to get its message across once you parse what it's saying? For my money, without question. This is also in a nutshell what I say about this pile of reused animation. Like, Jesus, it's not even subtle. But hey, once again, we're talking about human instrumentality here. These sections are literally taking place inside of these characters' souls, as a means to talk about things that are about as pivotal to the point of this series as we can get. And if End of Eva is anything to go by, this is basically just what Third Impact looks like from the inside. Again, just because it may have been a choice originally motivated by limitations doesn't automatically make it bad. Especially since it still manages to articulate what it's there to say with so much conviction. Cause sure, some of this animation isn't the best, but we're still talking about one of the best animation studios ever working at what may very well have been the top of their game. Even with this being incredibly rushed, these two episodes still manage to have some of the most iconic shots of the entire series, if not the whole of animation. And episode 26 has some pieces of animation that really are just stunning. Maybe not as cool as a giant robot battle, but still pretty impressive pieces of abstract animation nonetheless. But that's really it in a lot of ways, isn't it? That doesn't have a giant robot battle, or a proper reveal of what Seilei and the underlying conspiracy is, or a proper explanation of just what the hell is going on at large. And you know, like I said, if those are your biggest complaints about it, I think that's kind of fair. Those fights are, after all, very badass, very apocalyptic, very savage, 6 skills.
Smoking sexy style!
However, while these elements are important, I'd argue that they're not that important. Like, I'm not trying to claim they're unimportant, because they definitely are. They're just not as important as they may seem at first blush. In practice, these elements are far more often than not there in service to the story, rather than being the point of the story. The conspiracy stuff in particular sincerely seems to be something they just do not care about as much as stuff like the characters. Freshman English majors, a word of advice. In storytelling, time is currency. And how you spend that time is going to say more about what you value in your writing than anything else ever could. With that in mind, it starts to become clear that some of these corners weren't so much cut as much as they were just never really meant to be that well-rounded in the first place. The fact of the matter is, if they wanted to explain this stuff, they could have just done that. Sure, their budget was tight on this, but with the release of EOE and now the rebuild, it seems abundantly clear that Anno and crew just are not as invested in those elements as some people are. In fact, there's this tiny bit in End of Eva that I absolutely love that I think perfectly captures this apathy. So Masato's sitting down here hacking into Nerve's main computer or whatever, where she finds out the entire truth, the greatest secrets the series has to offer, with seemingly every single piece of lore there is to know about Nerve and the Evas right before her, and we even see it, and it's literally just 2 pages detailing the history of Gainax as an animation studio. Holy shit, dude, what a flex! I'm not going to say that this definitely proves Anno and Gainax don't care that much about the conspiracy and lore stuff, but I also can't think of a much more direct way to tell your audience that this background shit wasn't the point of the thing we were trying to make. It's not that important. Don't worry about it. You may disagree with my reading of that, and I can't really blame you. But even if you do, the fact remains. They had the chance to tell us 3 times now, and they still haven't. Sure, they gave us a little bit of extra info in End of Ava, but not really any more than was needed to at least kind of understand just what the hell was happening. Ava just does not really care about these things. Not to say you're wrong to wish they'd gone that route, but to hold that as a mark against these episodes feels like punishing them for failing to do something they never really set out to do. It's a bit like saying that Mario 64 sucks because we never find out the inner workings of how Peach and the Toads run the castle. Like, yeah, it'd be cool to see that anarcho-monarchist shit show play out, but pretty sure that's outside the scope of what Miyamoto is looking for. And while I don't want to come off as dismissive here, let's be completely frank. If Seele's plan had been properly revealed, they'd probably be a hell of a lot less interesting 20 years later. In fact, I can prove this, because in the hilariously named PS2 game Neon Genesis Evangelion 2, they actually revealed their plan. And it sucked. TLDR, Seele wanted to sacrifice all of humanity so that they, specifically, could fuse with the Eva and become a new god. This is canon. Technically. It does seem to be Anno's idea. Maybe. Doesn't really matter. Point is, you see how that instantly makes them less interesting? They immediately go from being this mysterious, otherworldly, untouchable stand-in for all self-serving political power to just a group of 12 evil dickheads who want more power. And it also raises questions I really shouldn't have to be thinking about, like, why would literally anyone ever support them in that, ever? On what possible pretense was Gendo helping them? Like, what non-betrayal related thing was he supposed to get out of this? And to top it all off, it adds nothing to the actual themes and ideas of the series. It's Garbo, and it's Garbo in a way that would only ever make the world of Ava less interesting. And as someone who themselves has spent years of their life combing through obscure scraps of lore to find out as much as I can about what's going on here, only to discover that learning all the secrets of the series basically begin to reveal for the anime adaptation of Ancient Aliens that it is, just like, trust me? It's better this way. And without that conspiracy plot, what is there left to fight against? All the angels are confirmed dead by this stage, leaving only the then vaguely alluded to mass-produced Avas, which would eventually play out in the end of Evangelion. However, even then, they only managed to squeeze in one real fight. And yeah, it's one hell of a fight, but it also has the exact outcome you'd expect given the circumstances. Ava was set up as such that at some point, we were always going to run out of shit for the Avas to fight. Sure, maybe seeing one last big robot blowout would be cool, but did we really need that? Like, at this point, what would it add, really? Even in EOE, it kind of serves no serious purpose, narratively or thematically. Its main contributions are some lore exposition only tangentially related to the fight itself, some fucking stellar Sakuga, and letting us see Asuka get some last-minute character development before being even further brutalized seemingly for the sole purpose of making the audience feel like shit. But neither it, nor the conspiracy responsible for it, ever really directly contribute a whole lot to Ava's core message and themes. I'm not saying it couldn't have worked, again, EOE is right there and fucking stellar, but rather that it's just not that vital that Ava as a series ended off with a big ol' robot stabby stab. Much more importantly, the series first and foremost needed to end off with a definitive conclusion for the emotional journey of these characters. At this stage, we have seen all of them just get absolutely tortured, sometimes literally, just one after another. Every terrible thing that could happen to these people has. And now as we cross the finish line after the series has once and for all officially broken every single major character we've come to know, it must have something to say about this unending torrent of human misery, right? You didn't make me watch Shinji kill his boyfriend for nothing, right, Ava? You didn't just make a whole franchise on vague bullshit secrecy about aliens to make me feel like shit for no reason, right? You're not Elfen Lied, right? Prove yourself to me, Ava, you overrated sack of shit. Show me one thing of serious value to take away from this narrative Chernobyl. Come on, do it! Do it! Do it!
I'm afraid. Why is that? I don't want to die. I don't want to disappear. I hate this. I hate everyone. Nobody cares about me. Nobody stays with me.
Wished for death. He ignored his will to survive and chose to die for a false hope. Survival is not a mistake, Shinji.
Are you sure?
Did you notice the tone shift? Sorry. Just trying to emulate the series. So, why do you deserve to exist? This isn't a question I'm pulling from thin air, by the way. The first thing we see at the beginning of episode 25 is the words raison d'etre, a French phrase which the series itself translates as one's reason for being. The reason why it's okay to be here. This is what all 4 of our main characters grapple with over the course of these next 2 episodes, though each for very different reasons. This isn't even subtext. Something episode 26 really hammers home is that they all share these same feelings of worthlessness and isolation. How do we find the self-worth required to be able to justify our own existence to ourselves? This is the primary question these last 2 episodes, and by extension, the original television airing of Neon Genesis Evangelion, are here to explore. I realize that these are really heavy questions that can be sincerely stressful to think on. So let's rephrase this in a way that makes it a little easier to tackle. Why does Shinji deserve to exist? The obvious answer is because he's human. But again, we have to remember, this isn't about whether or not humans deserve to exist, but rather if Shinji does. He needs to justify his own existence to himself in order to be able to justify waking up in the morning. And because I'm human clearly is not enough of an answer to serve as that much needed reason for being. Being human's great, but it doesn't actually make living as one any easier, especially when you're constantly surrounded by other humans who, on the surface at least, seem to have all their shit together while you struggle. So what does he have past that? His labor of piloting the Eva and the respect it affords him? I mean, that certainly is something of value he has. Kid's literally out here saving the world on the weekly. You do not get a much more meaningful role in the world than that. However, as we established, piloting the Eva is something he never really chooses to do. It's something he has to do, most certainly, but he does it purely for others. This is literally the climax of the very first episode. Him piloting the Eva isn't a true choice he makes as a result of his own desires, but more something that he just kind of is, because that's what people told him he should be. It's not something that necessarily reflects who he is. And it's that lack of reflection that generates his anxiety because he's essentially lying to everyone non-stop. This is part of the problem with having others determine your self-worth. It never addresses the real reason someone feels like they aren't accepted. Why does Shinji think he's worthless? Or moreover, what does he hope to accomplish by evaluating himself as worthless? Seemingly, he thinks by doing so he's putting others before himself, sparing them from having to deal with him. But at its core, what is the true end goal of putting others before ourselves? Well, for Shinji and the other pilots, it's simply getting others to like them. Obviously. That's where all of the social anxiety comes from. They place not just a high value on what others think of them, but the maximum amount of value. So, in some small way, everyone's opinion of them becomes life and death, because they're constantly looking to everyone around them to give them meaning and value. People will like me if I put on this persona to become the person they want me to be, and if they like me, that will prove I have value. But earnestly believing that's true also requires holding the inverse opinion, that people won't like you if you don't put on that persona, and that failing to do so will mean that you have no worth. It also kind of implies that people actively dislike him by default, which just is not the case in reality. Quite to the contrary, nearly everyone in the cast wants to be closer to him, but everyone just keeps everyone else at a distance because no one's willing to take the risk. Hedgehog's dilemma and all that. And that's not the end of it, because the best case scenario is that Shinji succeeds in getting people to like the pleasant facade he puts on, but the people around Shinji still won't know the real him. Even if you do find meaning in living like that, that also means your life is only worth living for as long as someone else is around and willing to give it meaning. Which is called
You are in a convenient symbiotic relationship, and that's dependency!
Yeah, that. And that is very decidedly not a healthy way to live, as we'll see. In order to be truly content, who you are must come from you. This is not just Shinji's big flaw, but all the Eva pilots. There's no good reason for them to feel the way they do, outside of them simply looking to find their value as people in all the wrong places. As is, it's impossible for them to find their self-worth by only piloting the Eva, because that would still require someone like Shinji to show their true selves, which he won't because he hates himself, because he thinks people won't accept the real him, which they won't because they never get to meet the real him, because he hides that person away, because he hates himself, and do you see how easy it is for this shit to be self-perpetuating? These are people that think they're worthless, so they push others away, which causes them to act in uncaring and hurtful ways to those around them, which leaves them alone and filled with shame for what they've done, so they think they're worthless. I like to call this the Shinji shame spiral. It's a cycle of circular logic founded on baseless assumptions that absolutely destroys everyone who gets caught in it, all as a result of trying to find your value from others. This failure to find purpose from external sources is surprisingly most apparent in Gendo, who is basically the miserable Charizard to Shinji's self-loathing Charmander. He has all of Shinji's flaws, but drawn out in a way that only a lifetime of disconnecting from other people to protect them can truly bring out of someone. And the resultant damage ruins the lives of literally every human being we see him come into contact with. We're talking about a man who, rather than simply learning how to communicate with others, would rather see the entire human race converted into sentient ooze purely so he can avoid talking to people like his son. Gendo Ikari is not someone to be idolized. With all this in mind, it starts to become clear that while we can garner some sense of value from what we do for the people around us, true, lasting self-worth has to come from within. Other people are important, they are valuable, and life would be terrible without them. But we need more than that. We need self-acceptance. However, the moment Shinji accepts this, he immediately hits another brick wall.
But I still hate myself.
Even if he takes it for granted that his value has to come from himself, Shinji, quite frankly, doesn't like or respect that person enough to be willing to take them into consideration on basically any front. But why does he hate himself? Well, this is where we come back to that little piece of circular logic from earlier. Shinji hates himself because he thinks everyone else hates the real him, a side of himself he never shows, so he feels unloved, so he hates himself and thinks he has to put on a persona to get acceptance from others. Which is especially tragic because it's so close to what it is he actually needs to do. This self-hatred means that Shinji believes that the only reason people tolerate him is because he helps people by piloting the Eva, and living as though that were the case does help him cope for a while. However, it's no secret that there's a finite amount of angels. Eventually, he'll have to either stop being an Eva pilot or start killing people. Sound familiar? This was always going to come to pass, and in a lot of ways, it would be true no matter what kind of act he tried to substitute it for. If he tried to find his worth in any job, no matter how fulfilling, then that means his self-worth becomes completely dependent on a lot of factors outside of his control. Whether or not he's able to remain physically and mentally fit enough to do his job, whether or not his work will remain relevant, whether or not the people in charge even want him to be around. We see this play out in no uncertain terms with Asuka, who completely breaks and seemingly attempts to commit suicide after no longer being able to pilot her Eva. That's not to say that living like this can't bring Shinji happiness at least for a time, but doing so means his entire reason for being will hang by a thread that he has very little say over. Should the slightest thing go wrong, Shinji would lose not just his financial support, but everything that gives him a reason to live. And, as we see in Raison, this still stands true if your goal in life is just to receive love and affection from one specific person. Do not forget the main rule of Eva. Anything terrible that can happen, will. No matter how you slice it, living like this is an existential crisis waiting to happen. As such, it starts to become clear that Shinji needs to take care of himself, if only because no one else can do it. But if he hates himself, then what can he do? To answer that, we need to talk about freedom. Freedom is something that episode 26 in particular takes serious interest in, and at first glance, it can almost seem like it comes out of nowhere. This is where a lot of that art style variation comes into play, as a way of highlighting that Shinji has the freedom to be defined in any number of potential ways by others around him. However, if you're a desperately cloying pseudo-intellectual like me, then when you've got a question about freedom in relation to finding our reason for being, you turn to one man, Jean-Paul Sartre. That's right, we're like 40 minutes in and now we're talking about French existential philosophers in regards to the meaning of Eva. We have gone full self-absorbed Eva nerd, y'all. I am sorry, I lied to you. I shall now retreat to my cocoon for the next 6 months before I finally emerge as a fully formed Bitcoin trader. The more student debt encumbered among you may have noticed that I've been kind of dancing around this guy for a while. I can't find any sources that state he was a direct influence on Evangelion, but a lot of his philosophy does map onto Ava's themes very cleanly. A lot of what we've talked about so far has some pretty strong parallels to his famous assertion that existence precedes essence, and the ways in which believing otherwise leads people into living in what Sartre called bad faith. However, more relevantly to the question at hand are his thoughts on what freedom means for people.
Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. It is up to you to give it a meaning.
You know what the best and scariest part of not being defined by other people is? You then have the freedom to choose who you are and what role you're going to have in the world. Which, on the one hand, really cool, right? Get to do all that awesome self-determining stuff and live as your true self and all that other good junk. On the other hand, though... What?! Dude, I just got here. Someone else has to have figured out how the shit works already. I'm still not even sure exactly how nacho cheese is made, and you expect me to decide how I should live? That's a pretty tall order to fill for anyone. And it can be easy for that responsibility to feel overwhelming. Sartre called this the anguish of freedom, the despair brought about by the overwhelming amount of options we truly have. And this is more or less the ultimate source of Shinji's anxiety. It's why he's constantly seeking for people to tell him what to do and impose limits on him, so that his world feels properly structured and well-defined. Problem is, though, that real life is seldom either of those things. This isn't to say limits are bad, however. Quite to the contrary. We need some kind of way to frame and understand the world, something to determine what's up and what's down. The catch is that you need to choose and justify those limits yourself. Shinji needs to choose for himself what he is and isn't willing to do, feel out his own moral code. Otherwise, the moment he's left without someone to tell him what to do, he's liable to do some terrible shit. What makes this both amazing and terrifying, though, is that it reveals the real you, who you truly are at your core. That's the thing about freedom. What you choose to do with it says far more about you than words ever could. Someone who chooses to be kind will always be more worthy of respect than someone who is forced to be kind at gunpoint. Moreover, though, the person who chooses to be kind reveals that being kind is part of who they are as an individual. As such, it stands to reason that if Shinji doesn't like who he is, then, quite simply, he still has the freedom to change and begin acting like the kind of person he truly wants to be. It's not that others need to recognize and accept Shinji for who he is, it's that Shinji needs to recognize and accept himself, to acknowledge his own value as a person. He needs to accept himself in the way that he wants other people around him to accept him, as who he is in his entirety, flaws and all. Did Shinji do some terrible shit? Yeah, no doubt. Especially if we consider this as taking place in the same canon as End of Eva. However, this isn't about whether or not we should forgive Shinji, it's about whether or not Shinji should forgive himself. And, frankly, he kind of has to. That's the only way he can grow and be better, begin to become his own person, start defining himself by his own beliefs, and start making a positive impact on the people around him. It's hard emotional labor, to be sure, but if he doesn't do that, well...
Freedom is what we do with what is done to us.
There is a reality where Shinji isn't an Eva pilot. There is a reality where he doesn't give anyone anything, and people still care about him all the same. He provably has more value than his role as a pilot. This isn't to say he shouldn't be a pilot, but rather that he doesn't need to be one to have self-worth. It is possible to change, but that begins with coming to terms not with what you think or wish you were, but who and what you actually are. Most notably, free to change. The number one way to ensure that you are worthless is to assume that you are worthless. Once you do, you'll have nothing to lose and all the reason to justify whatever terrible shit you want to do. 'Cause hey, you suck anyways, right? And that's how you fall into the Shinji shame spiral. We assume that people don't really get who we are, while we consciously avoid even getting to know that person, all for the sake of making others happy. And then we wonder why we feel so isolated. And if this sounds familiar to you in particular, for the love of God, please do not feel any shame over it whatsoever. This is a lot of people in the world, so much so that they made a multi-million-dollar giant robot franchise about it. That may be the biggest twist of the entire series. Shinji, Rei, Asuka, all of them are ultimately, at the end of the day, not that weird. They've lived through extraordinary circumstances for sure, but what it is that really troubles them and the ways they try to cope with them are as common as anything can be. The connections we make define us, but we can't let those connections determine who we are at heart. We have the freedom to enter those connections ourselves and be honest about the fully formed person we are. It's just a matter of finding the strength to do so. And that is easier said than done, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. Hell is other people, but we, individually, can live in heaven. All you have to do is have the will to survive and take care of yourself. This is what makes Eva, and these last 2 episodes in particular, so special. This isn't just some generic saccharine love yourself bullshit. It lays out a logical argument for why you shouldn't look to others to tell you who you are, and instead should focus on befriending yourself and shaping that person into someone you want them to be. It lays out a logical argument for why you shouldn't look to others to tell you who you are, and instead should focus on befriending yourself and shaping that person into someone you want them to be. If you pretend to be someone you aren't, people won't get to know the real you. Therefore, since people don't get to know the real you won't ever be known for who you are. So you will continue to believe that no one could ever possibly like the real you and continually feel isolated. Therefore, you will perpetually feel alienated from other people. Therefore, you think that alienation is justified because you suck. Therefore, you hate yourself. Therefore, you pretend to be someone you aren't. Hence, don't do that. Be honest about who you are and do your best to learn to love and accept that person even if they frustrate you at times, and try to make them act like a better person tomorrow than they were today. And whether or not you want to accept that logic is entirely up to you. But to this day, I have seen a million people slip into the trap that Evangelion is here to warn us about. Smart people, emotionally capable people. I still fall into this trap, and it's a lesson I've learned. It is hard emotional labor to internalize it. But as a kid growing up, I still feel really lucky that I had Evangelion, and particularly these 2 final episodes, to teach me that. And this is everything that Evangelion was always building to. For whatever flaws these 2 episodes may have, they still succeed at the most important goal. They effectively complete the character arc of every major cast member while finally coming to a strong conclusion about the main theme it's been playing with since the beginning. Could these episodes have been more bombastic, more effectively told, more well animated? Maybe. But I could also point that kind of critique at literally any piece of media in the world. Moreover, I don't think these episodes need to be more than what they are. They showed up to make a steadfast declaration about the worth of each individual person's capacity for self-love, and, by extension, the love and support people are capable of giving to each other. For all of the physical and emotional brutality the show puts its audience through, it's all ultimately in service of one of the most uplifting and heartfelt points a piece of media can possibly make. It is respect for humanity in one of its purest forms, and all from a man who very famously struggled to understand others, but seemingly had finally come to value and appreciate them. Boy, we sure showed Anno wrong, huh? So now we're back here, with the death threats. Yay. But let's set that aside for a moment. As I said approximately 563 years ago when we started this video, I can still see how, even in the face of all of this, why someone may still prefer the end of Evangelion. Primarily because that movie never really aims to be a fix for 25 and 26 like so many people seemingly expected it to be, but rather is more of a direct refutation of the message these episodes have, which, as we've established, kinda justified. Maybe we'll look at End of Eva in more depth one day because it truly is one glorious fuck you of a movie designed from the ground up to be as unsatisfying and miserable as possible, and I love it. But for our purposes, let's wrap with this. When I look at the end of Evangelion, I do not see an attempt to fix the end of TV. Quite to the contrary, I see something meant to directly counter it. I wouldn't be surprised if everything that happened up until Third Impact was the original plan for the series. Hell, you can even see unfinished animation that would eventually become part of End of Evangelion in the episode previews, as well as the episodes themselves. However, everything else though seems to be a sincere, heartfelt attempt to tell the audience, never mind, you deserve to feel like shit. It's honestly amazing. It's not often you get to see a master of a craft operating at the top of their game, using it to be as petty as humanly possible. This isn't to say that End of Eva has nothing to compliment 25 and 26 though. I think I've already drawn plenty of parallels there. However, here's something I don't think most people know. Did you know that of all of the infamous letters that show up in End of Eva, only a couple of them are actually death threats? Not to imply that they didn't actually get a ton of them, but rather that that's not all they chose to highlight. Let us look at a couple translated excerpts, shall we?
Evangelion を見た後、私はとっても感動。In the last scene on TV, Shinji accepts everyone, and they all congratulate him. That was a very nice end, and I felt very happy. This year I graduate from middle school, and now my focus is on being a high school student, so that's why I'll now make my best effort. I'm going to see the Eva movie. I'm worried about what will happen to Shinji in the movie, but I like the last scene on the TV series a whole lot. And thanks to Eva, I've started to like myself, and that has made me very happy. I also felt inside myself that same excitement that Shinji felt. The last scenes made me appreciate my own existence even more. The feeling of the very last scene paralleled the feelings of the main character, Shinji. Thanks to Mr. Ano and all the staff for helping to liberate our hearts and souls, and for all of these feelings. Thank you very much.
Some people got it. And Ano knows that. You know what the real difference between End of TV and End of Eva is? I mean, yes, all the violence, but like on a thematic level. In the End of TV, Shinji doesn't give up. In End of Eva, he does. In one, the best of him wins, and he commits to trying his hardest to love himself. In the other, his worst. Like, just look at this. Could these two final shots be more thoroughly worlds apart in every way? It paints a portrait of someone with a sincere love for people that truly believes that every person is worthy of, and more importantly, capable of, self-love. But he also can't help but notice the absolute worst of what people can do. All of the unique and terrible ways they can hurt everyone around them because we can't figure out how to deal with our own damage. And then he has that moment of hesitation, and he questions whether or not people are as good as he wants to believe. He still clearly wants to believe, but given everything, it's kinda hard sometimes. Sorry if I find that relatable. But all the same, I feel like taking them both as equals gives us something significantly richer than we would have otherwise. It's something that's starry-eyed and hopeful, but also not going to lie about what kind of horror people are capable of. It's optimistic, but world-weary. And that is something that's truly unique. Was it worth all the death threats to Gainax and Hideaki Anno in particular? No. Don't fucking do that. Nonetheless, this is the universe we find ourselves in, and taking that for what it is, I'm happy to see we could get these two amazing yet completely distinct pieces of art because they are each truly stellar from beginning to end. However, for my part, the original ending is always going to win out between the two. Once you strip away all the pretense and controversy around them and just listen to what they have to say, these last two episodes speak with a clarity that can be sorely needed to reach those who need to hear it the most. Unsurprisingly, what I'm saying comes from experience. 14-year-old me was an idiot, but I'm glad they had something like this to point them in the right direction. So to see someone insist that these episodes were mistakes that you should just skip over, well, if you haven't seen why I think that's kind of heartbreaking, then I don't know if there's anything left to say. Mainly because chances are you're that dickhead from the very beginning of all of this. Anyways, I'm a goddamn weirdo. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and has anyone else noticed that Evangelion and Persona 4 have literally the exact same moral? Importance of connection, self-acceptance, being totally definitely straight? No? Just me? Okay. Hey y'all, Ryan here. Holy shit, this was long! And if you got this far, sincerely, thank you for taking your time to watch, and I really do hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. Need to give a huge shout out to Sky for his killer delivery on that intro. You should absolutely go check out his stellar Dishonored video once you're done here. Link below. Shout out once again to Cheesy Blue Nips and Zakifras for voicing and animating my new favorite puppet respectively. Thank you to my good friend Ajax for voicing Sartre and giving them the kind of dramatic weight it deserves. And finally, big love to everyone who took the time to read over the script and give me feedback. This would have been a lot worse without you guys. Thank you. Most importantly though, I would absolutely love to give one last huge thank you to every last single person who is currently supporting me over on Patreon. That includes such amazing people as Thomas Hederman, Gescheit Gutspielt, Rebirth Plan, Kevin Thurber, Black Mage App, Alexander Warenko, Sean M. Robertson, David Marino, Frank Shimizu, Matthew Hurwitz, Athrea, Michael Ebmeyer, Jerison Vardasek, Jonathan Quavito, Spiral Power, Ross Lampert, Foxcade, The Real James, Sky, and last but not least, Matthew Cassidy, as well as everyone else kind enough to be supporting me. Thank you all so much. In case you're wondering, no, I am not an anime channel now. Games will be back very soon. I just really want to talk about this because, you know, Ava's cool, homie. New Perfect Parry soon. Maybe some other cool stuff as well. Thank you again for watching. I love you all. Peace.